The morning started like any other aboard the research vessel Morning Star, with the hum of engines and the soft glow of distant nebulae painting colors across the observation windows. Katie Morrison pressed her face against the reinforced glass and watched streams of purple and blue gas swirl in patterns that reminded her of paintings. Back on Earth, only 13 years old and already traveling among the stars because her father believed learning happened best through experience rather than textbooks. "Dad, come look at this one," she called out, pointing at a formation that looked like a giant flower blooming in the darkness of space. Eric Morrison glanced up from his data screens and smiled at his daughter. His work studying nebula formations taking him far from home, but he refused to leave Katie behind after her mother passed away 3 years ago. "That's a stellar nursery," he explained, walking over to stand beside her. "In a few million years, new stars will be born right there." Katie grinned and pulled out her sketchpad, trying to capture the swirling colors before they shifted into new patterns. The ship carried a crew of 12 scientists and technicians, all focused on mapping the gas clouds in this remote sector of space that no one had properly studied before. Everything changed when the alarms started screaming. Captain Ben Torres rushed to the bridge as red warning lights flooded every corridor, his voice cracking over the intercom system. "All hands. We have unknown vessels approaching at high speed," he announced, trying to keep the panic from his voice, but failing. Eric grabbed Katie's hand and pulled her toward the emergency stations, his heart pounding because they were researchers, not soldiers, and their ship had no weapons beyond basic defensive shields. Through the windows, massive warships appeared like dark shadows against the colorful nebula, their hulls covered in sharp angles and aggressive weapon ports that left no doubt about their purpose. "This is the Valorian Imperial Fleet," a harsh voice crackled over the communication system. "Your vessel has violated restricted space and will be seized for interrogation." Captain Torres frantically checked their navigation logs, his hands shaking as he pulled up star charts. "We're in neutral space," he transmitted back. "There must be some mistake." "We're just scientists studying." The transmission cut off as blue energy beams lanced out from the warships and struck the Morning Star's engines, not destroying them, but disabling all propulsion systems in one precise strike. Katie felt the deck shudder beneath her feet as their ship went dead in space, emergency lighting casting everything in dim red shadows. "Dad, what's happening?" she whispered, gripping his hand tighter. Eric pulled her close and tried to sound calm even though terror clawed at his throat. "It's going to be okay, sweetheart," he lied. "Just stay with me and do exactly what I say." Boarding pods clamped onto the Morning Star's hull with metallic clangs that echoed through the corridors. Cutting torches began burning through the airlocks. The crew gathered in the main common area as Eric had instructed, hands raised and offering no resistance, because what else could unarmed scientists do against a military force? The Valorians who stormed aboard stood nearly 7 feet tall with gray-scaled skin and eyes that reflected light like a cat's. Their armor covered in symbols that probably meant rank and unit designations. Commander Vex led the boarding party, his reptilian features twisted into what might have been contempt as he surveyed the trembling humans. "Pathetic," he hissed in perfect English, which somehow made everything worse because it meant they had studied humans and still chose to attack. "Separate them for interrogation." Valorian soldiers began grabbing crew members and dragging them toward different parts of the ship. Ignoring their protests and pleas, Eric held Katie behind him as a soldier approached, his voice desperate. "Please, she's just a child. She doesn't know anything about." The soldier struck Eric across the face with a gaunted hand, sending him sprawling to the deck. Katie screamed and tried to run to her father, but rough hands grabbed her arms and lifted her off the ground. "Dad!" she shrieked, kicking at the soldier holding her, but her small legs did nothing against the armored warrior. "Katie!" Eric struggled to his feet, blood running from his split lip. "Let her go. Take me instead, please." Commander Vex stepped between them and studied Katie with cold, calculating eyes. "The weak link," he said thoughtfully. "Children break faster than adults, and parents break fastest when they hear their children scream." The words hit Eric like physical blows as he realized what Vex intended. No, please. I'll tell you anything you want to know," Eric begged. Dropping to his knees, "We're just researchers. We don't have any classified information. We were only studying the nebula formations. Then your daughter's interrogation will be brief," Vex replied without emotion. Nodding to his soldiers, they dragged Katie toward one of the boarding pods as she screamed for her father, her voice echoing through the corridors until distance and sealed doors finally cut off the sound. Eric lunged after them, but 3 soldiers grabbed him and forced him to the ground, holding him there as he sobbed and shouted his daughter's name. Back on Earth, millions of miles away in the void of space, an automated beacon activated aboard the Morning Star. The ship's emergency systems had been programmed to send distress signals if certain conditions were met: hostile boarding, crew distress, separation of family units, all 3 conditions triggered simultaneously. At Outpost 7 on the edge of human-controlled space, Captain Ryan Hughes sat in the command center reviewing supply reports when his console suddenly lit up with urgent alerts. "Sir, we're receiving an automated distress call," a communications officer reported, her face going pale as she read the incoming data. "It's the Morning Star. They've been boarded by unknown hostiles." Ryan brought up the signal analysis and felt his blood run cold as he saw the biometric data streaming in. Katie Morrison, age 30, stress levels critical and rising. Neural activity indicating severe pain. The automated systems had been recording everything and transmitting it all back to human space in real time. "Get me Admiral Chun at Earth Defense Command," Ryan ordered, his voice hardening. "Tell her we have a situation that requires immediate response." As the communication channels opened and began routing his call through the military network, Ryan listened to the distress beacon's data feed. Somewhere in the darkness of space, a child was screaming, and humanity was about to hear every second of it. The Valorians had made their first mistake by attacking a human vessel. Their second mistake was far worse. They had no idea what they had just started, or how much humans valued their children. The warning would come later, but the reckoning had already begun. The human frigate Vigilant dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the coordinates where the Morning Star had last transmitted, and Captain Jake Palmer immediately knew something terrible had happened. The research vessel floated dead in space with scorch marks across its hull and boarding pod attachment points still visible on the outer airlock doors. "Life signs?" Jake demanded, gripping the armrests of his command chair hard enough to make his knuckles white. "None, sir," his sensor officer reported quietly. "The ship is completely empty." Jake ordered a full forensic scan as he tried to control the anger building in his chest like a physical pressure. The Vigilant science team worked quickly and efficiently because they all understood the urgency. Analyzing weapon signatures and energy residue left behind by the attackers. "Captain, I've identified the weapons used," Lieutenant Amy Richards called out from her station. They matched known Valorian Imperial technology. The name meant little to most of the crew, but Jake had studied the intelligence reports on various alien civilizations during his years in the fleet. The Valorians controlled dozens of systems in the Outer Rim and had a reputation for brutal efficiency and complete disregard for species they considered inferior. "Pull up everything from the ship's logs," Jake ordered. "I want to know exactly what happened here." The data recovery took nearly an hour, but what they found made every person on the bridge fall silent. The automated recording systems had captured everything: the attack, the boarding, the separation of crew members. And then they heard Katie's voice. The 13-year-old girl calling for her father as Valorian soldiers dragged her away, her screams echoing through empty corridors before being cut off by closing doors. Jake watched the biometric data stream across his screens and felt something cold settle in his stomach. The sensors had recorded 3 days of torture. 3 days of a child's pain levels spiking and falling and spiking, again, as the Valorians used their neural interrogation devices on her. "Sir, the automated beacon has been transmitting all of this back to Earth Defense Command in real time," Amy said quietly, her voice shaking with barely controlled rage. Jake looked at his crew and saw the same cold fury reflected on every face. "Transmit everything we found to Command," he ordered, "and prepare the ship for combat operations." Nobody questioned the order because they all knew what came next. Back on Earth, at the sprawling Defense Command headquarters, Admiral Lisa Chun stood in the war room surrounded by holographic displays showing star charts and fleet positions. She had spent the last 6 hours reviewing every piece of data from the Morning Star incident, watching the recordings, reading the analysis, studying the biometric feeds. The Emergency Council had assembled within hours of receiving the first distress call. Military commanders, government officials, intelligence specialists. Commander Amy Richards' sister worked in intelligence at Earth and had compiled everything known about the Valorian Empire for the Council's review. They were a militant civilization that had conquered 47 star systems through overwhelming force and intimidation. Their interrogation techniques were designed to break prisoners as quickly as possible with no regard for lasting damage or death. They had encountered dozens of species over their centuries of expansion, and every single one had eventually submitted to their rule. General Chris Bennett sat across from Lisa and stared at the biometric data with haunted eyes. He had lost his own daughter 5 years ago to an accident aboard a colony ship, and the sight of Katie Morrison's pain levels triggered memories he had tried to bury. "We need to vote," Lisa said quietly, looking around the table at faces she had known for years, colleagues who had become friends. Full military mobilization against the Valorian Empire. The vote took less than 30 seconds. Every hand went up without hesitation within hours. Orders went out across human-controlled space through encrypted military channels that bypassed all civilian networks. 73 warships began departing from stations around 9 different star systems. Their crews told only that they were responding to a critical situation. The mobilization happened without public announcement because Earth's government wanted to maintain operational security. Lisa personally took command of the dreadnought Retribution, the most powerful warship in the human fleet with enough firepower to level a small moon. General Chris Bennett commanded the Marine Assault Forces, 15,000 soldiers trained for boarding actions and planetary operations. The fleet converged toward Valorian space in a carefully coordinated movement that would bring all forces into position simultaneously. Meanwhile, in the Valorian flagship, Katie had been subjected to interrogation for 3 standard days. Commander Vex grew increasingly frustrated because neither the child nor her father would provide useful intelligence. Katie kept insisting through her tears that they were just studying nebula formations, that she didn't know anything about military secrets or strategic plans. Eric had broken on the first day when he heard his daughter's screams echoing through the ship's ventilation system. He told the Valorians everything he knew about human settlements, trade routes, scientific research. All of it useless information because he was exactly what he claimed to be, a civilian scientist. But Vex refused to believe that humans would send an unarmed research vessel into deep space without some hidden purpose. He reported his findings to Emperor Kroth at the Valorian throne world, explaining that the humans appeared to be genuinely simple explorers with no military value. Emperor Kroth reviewed the report with cold calculation. "Continue the interrogation," he ordered. "Make an example of them so other Species understand the cost of entering our territory. The fact that the Morning Star had been in neutral space meant nothing to Krath, because the Valorians considered all nearby space to be theirs by right of superior force. Vex followed his orders without question because disobedience meant death in the Valorian military. Katie endured another session with the neural pain inducers while her father listened helplessly from a cell 3 corridors away. Neither of them knew that help was coming. Neither of them knew that humanity had mobilized its entire military force. The Valorians had no idea what they had triggered because they had never bothered to truly study human nature. They saw a species that controlled only 9 star systems compared to their 47. They saw technology that appeared less advanced than their own weapons. They saw what they assumed was weakness. What they failed to understand was that humans measured strength differently. Every species the Valorians had conquered fought for territory or resources or power. Humans fought for their children. The difference would prove catastrophic. Admiral Lisa Chun stood on the bridge of the Retribution as her fleet prepared to enter Valorian space. She had drafted an ultimatum in simple, clear language. Return Katie Morrison and Eric Morrison, unharmed within 24 hours, or face total war. The message would be transmitted to Emperor Krath as soon as the fleet arrived. Lisa expected the Valorians to refuse because species with that much arrogance rarely backed down from threats. She hoped they would refuse because humanity needed to send a message to every civilization in the galaxy. Some lines could not be crossed. Some innocents could not be harmed. Some mistakes could not be forgiven. The Valorians were about to learn all 3 lessons. Emperor Krath sat on his crystalline throne deep within the palace on the Valorian home world when the human ultimatum arrived. His advisors gathered in the vast chamber as the message played on holographic displays, all of them watching their emperor's reaction carefully. The ultimatum was simple and direct. Return Katie Morrison and Eric Morrison, unharmed within 24 hours, or humanity would consider it an act of war. Krath listened to the entire message in silence, and then he laughed. The sound echoed through the throne room, and his advisors quickly joined in because not laughing when the Emperor laughed could be dangerous. A species controlling 9 star systems threatens one controlling 47. Krath asked, still chuckling, what arrogance from such an inferior civilization. His chief military advisor brought up tactical displays showing comparative force analyses. Human technology appeared less advanced than Valorian weapons based on long-range scans. Human fleet numbers were smaller with only 73 capital ships compared to the Valorian Navy's 215. Human territory was compact and defensible, but lacked the strategic depth of the sprawling Valorian Empire. They cannot win a military confrontation, the advisor concluded confidently. Their threat is empty posturing. Krath considered the situation with the cold calculation that had kept him in power for 37 years. He could return the humans and avoid conflict, but that would make him look weak. Other species would see the Valorians backing down from a smaller civilization and begin questioning Valorian dominance. No, he needed to make an example. Execute the male human publicly, Krath ordered, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. Broadcast it across all our territories so everyone understands the price of threatening the Empire. His advisors nodded in approval because the decision aligned with Valorian philosophy. Strength through demonstration of cruelty. Keep the female child alive, Krath added thoughtfully. If the humans prove foolish enough to actually attack, we can use her as a hostage. Commander Vex received the orders aboard his flagship and immediately began preparations for Eric Morrison's execution. Katie remained in her cell, exhausted from days of torture, but alive. She didn't know her father was about to die. She didn't know that human warships were gathering at the edge of Valorian space. All she knew was pain and fear, and the desperate hope that someone would come. Emperor Krath composed a response to the human ultimatum and broadcast it not just to Earth but across every communications channel in the region. The Valorian Empire does not negotiate with inferior species, his message declared. Your demands are rejected and your threats are meaningless. He made sure to include footage of Valorian military power, massive battleships, planetary defense networks, armies of soldiers. The message ended with a warning that any human vessel entering Valorian space would be destroyed on sight. Krath felt satisfied with his response because it projected the strength and confidence expected of an emperor. He had no way of knowing that he had just made the worst decision of his life. Admiral Lisa Chun received Krath's refusal aboard the Retribution and read it without any visible emotion. Around her, the bridge crew waited silently for her response. "Weapons free," Lisa said quietly, and those two words sealed the Valorian Empire's fate. The human fleet had positioned itself at the edge of Valorian space while waiting for the ultimatum deadline. 73 warships suddenly decloaked and activated their faster-than-light drives simultaneously. Valorian sensor stations detected the movement and alarms began screaming across their defense network. 3 Valorian battlegroups scrambled to respond, confident that their superior numbers and firepower would quickly crush the human attack. The first battle lasted exactly 17 minutes. Human ships emerged from faster-than-light, travel in perfect formation, and immediately opened fire with weapons the Valorians had never seen before. Focus particle beams punched through Valorian shields like they weren't even there. Antimatter missiles detonated with devastating precision, targeting engine cores and weapon systems. Kinetic railguns fired projectiles at relativistic speeds that tore through armor plating like paper. The Valorian commander of the defense force sent increasingly desperate reports back to the throne world. His ships were being destroyed faster than his tactical computers could track. The humans fought with terrifying efficiency, coordinating their attacks with a level of precision that suggested either exceptional training or advanced artificial intelligence. When the battle ended, 3 complete Valorian battle groups had been reduced to drifting wreckage. Not a single human ship had been destroyed. Only 2 had suffered any damage at all, and both were already conducting repairs. Admiral Lisa Chun reviewed the battle reports and allowed herself a small, cold smile. Humanity had spent decades developing weapons technology in secret, letting other species underestimate their capabilities. Now those species would learn the truth. The human fleet pushed deeper into Valorian territory, moving from system to system with unstoppable momentum. Lisa gave strict orders that targeted only military installations, warships, defense platforms, military bases, civilian populations, and infrastructure were to be completely avoided. This restraint confused the Valorians more than outright aggression would have. Every species they had ever fought tried to inflict maximum damage and terror. The humans fought with surgical precision, destroying only what was necessary to achieve their objective. Captain Jake Palmer led a strike force of 12 ships toward the last known position of Commander Vex's flagship. Intelligence suggested that Katie and Eric were still aboard that vessel. Jake's ships found the Valorian flagship attempting to flee toward the capital world with an escort of 6 heavy cruisers. "This is Captain Jake Palmer of the human vessel Vigilant," he broadcast on all frequencies. "Return Katie Morrison and Eric. Morrison alive and unharmed, or we will destroy every ship in your fleet." Commander Vex listened to the transmission from his command throne and felt something he had never experienced before: genuine fear. His escorts had already been obliterated by the human attack. His flagship shields were failing under concentrated fire from weapons that burned through defensive fields like they were nothing. Vex had 2 choices: die with his pride intact or surrender and face disgrace. Before he could make the decision, one of his subordinates made it for him. The officer opened a channel to the human ships, "We surrender," he transmitted. "We will deliver the prisoners to a neutral location." Vex roared in fury and reached for his weapon, but two other officers grabbed him and forced him down. They had families on the homeworld and didn't want to die for one commander's pride. Jake received the surrender and felt no satisfaction. "You have 1 hour," he responded coldly. "Any deviation from our instructions, and we resume fire." Meanwhile, on the Valorian throne world, Emperor Krath watched his military crumble in real time. Tactical displays showed human forces systematically destroying every defensive position. His advisors panicked because nothing in their intelligence had prepared them for this level of military capability. "How did we miss this?" Krath demanded, slamming his fist on the armrest of his throne. How did a species controlling 9 systems hide this kind of power? Nobody had an answer because everyone had made the same mistake, assuming technological inferiority meant military weakness. Commander Vex's flagship transmitted a message. Both human prisoners were alive, but the female child was severely traumatized. Krath realized with growing horror that he had tortured the child of a species that could destroy his entire civilization. He ordered his personal guard to prepare defensive positions around the palace. But he also began drafting terms for returning the prisoners. Pride warred with survival instinct in his mind. Admiral Lisa Chun transmitted one final message to Emperor Krath. It contained no threats or demands. Just footage of Katie Morrison's torture, recorded by the automated systems aboard the Morning Star. And beneath it, a single question. "Do you have children?" Krath watched the footage, and for the first time in his reign felt shame. He had ordered the torture of a child to make a political point. Now the child's people were burning his empire to ash. The exchange took place in orbit above the Valorian capital world with human warships, forming a complete blockade around the planet. General Chris Bennett personally led the negotiation team because he had insisted on being there when Katie was returned. The Marines who accompanied him stood in perfect formation, but every single one wore expressions of barely controlled fury. A Valorian shuttle approached the neutral meeting point slowly, its weapons powered down and shields at minimum as instructed. Chris watched through the viewports as the shuttle docked and felt his heart pounding. The airlock cycled open and Valorian guards emerged first with their hands clearly visible and empty. Then came Eric Morrison, stumbling and supporting his daughter who could barely walk. Katie's eyes were glazed with trauma and her small body bore marks from the neural pain inducers. Chris had to physically restrain himself from shooting every Valorian in sight. Lieutenant Nicole Harper rushed forward with her medical kit, her hands gentle as she began assessing Katie's condition. "Severe neurological trauma," Nicole reported quietly, her voice shaking with anger. "Multiple contusions, dehydration, signs of sustained torture over at least 72 hours. Eric held his daughter and both of them were crying, his face buried in her hair as he whispered that she was safe now. The Marines who witnessed the reunion had to be ordered multiple times to stand down because several had raised their weapons toward the Valorian guards. Chris walked slowly toward the Valorians, and every step felt like he was fighting against the urge to kill them all. "Get back on your shuttle," he said in a voice that promised death if they hesitated. The Valorians fled without another word. Nicole carefully sedated Katie for transport because the child was having a panic attack, triggered by the presence of so many armed people. Eric refused to let go of his daughter, even as medical personnel tried to move her to the sick bay. Chris allowed it because he understood what Eric was feeling. Back aboard the Retribution, Admiral Lisa Chun watched the exchange through live feeds and felt a cold satisfaction. Katie was alive. That was what mattered most. Now came the reckoning. Lisa transmitted a message to Emperor Krath demanding a face-to-face meeting. Krath refused at first, sending representatives instead. Lisa rejected every delegation and gave Krath 1 hour to present himself or watch his capital world burn. The threat was not empty, and Krath knew it because human warships had already demonstrated their ability to destroy Valorian military assets with terrifying ease. When Krath finally appeared on the communication channel, he tried to maintain his imperial dignity. Lisa showed him no mercy. She played recordings of Katie's torture in full detail, forcing him to watch every moment. She showed him biometric data proving that a 13-year-old child had endured 3 days of agony. She showed him Eric Morrison's desperate pleas to take him instead. Then she asked her question, "Do you have children, Emperor Krath?" The question hung in the air between them. Krath had 7 offspring. All adults now, but he remembered them as children. His silence was answer enough. "Then you understand what you have done," Lisa said quietly, and her voice carried more menace than any shout. "You tortured a child to make a political point." Krath tried to respond, but Lisa cut him off. "I don't want to hear excuses or justifications," she continued. "I want you to understand what happens next." Lisa switched the transmission to broadcast mode, sending it not just to Krath but to every communications node in the Valorian Empire. She addressed the entire civilization. Humanity does not seek conquest or dominion over other species. Lisa began. "We came to the stars looking for knowledge and peaceful coexistence." Tactical displays behind her showed the positions of every Valorian military asset. Every single one was surrounded by human forces. "But there are lines that cannot be crossed without consequence." Lisa's voice hardened. "Arming human children is one of those lines." She activated a weapons demonstration that had been prepared specifically for this moment. Human ships fired precisely controlled antimatter bursts at 3 uninhabited moons in the Valorian system. The moons vaporized in seconds, turned into expanding clouds of superheated gas. The destructive power displayed was beyond anything the Valorians had imagined possible. "We could have done this to your cities," Lisa said flatly. "We could have glassed every planet in your empire and killed billions." She paused to let that sink in. "We chose not to because I'm like you. We understand that power must be tempered with restraint." Krath watched his moons disappear and felt true fear for the first time in his life. Lisa outlined her terms. Emperor Krath would be removed from power immediately and exiled rather than executed. The Valorian military would be reduced to system defense forces, only with all offensive capabilities dismantled. Reparations would be paid to Katie Morrison and Eric Morrison for 3 generations. All Valorian interrogation technology must be destroyed under human supervision, and most importantly, the Valorians must broadcast a warning to every known species in the galaxy. "What warning?" Krath asked, his voice hollow. Lisa's expression remained cold. "You will tell every civilization you have contact with that humanity protects its children above all else," she explained. "You will tell them what happened when you harmed one of ours. You will tell them to hide." The single word carried weight beyond its simple meaning. Hide your cruelty. Hide your torture chambers. Hide anything that might harm a human child. Because if humanity found it, there would be consequences. Krath wanted to refuse, but he looked at the tactical displays showing his helpless fleet. He looked at the recordings of the vaporized moons. He looked at Admiral Lisa Chun's face and saw no mercy there. "I accept your terms," he whispered. Lisa nodded once. "You have 48 hours to begin implementation," she said. "Human observers will monitor your compliance." She terminated the connection without ceremony on the Valorian throne world. Krath's government began to collapse as news of the surrender spread. His advisors abandoned him. His military commanders refused his orders within hours. A provisional government formed and placed Krath under arrest. They would exile him to a remote mining colony where he could spend the rest of his life remembering the child he tortured and the empire he destroyed. Aboard the human medical ship where Katie was being treated, doctors worked carefully to repair the neurological damage. The physical injuries would heal in weeks. the psychological trauma would take much longer. Eric sat beside his daughter's bed and held her hand, whispering apologies, even though none of this was his fault. General Chris Bennett visited the medical bay and stood in the doorway watching. He saw his own daughter in Katie's face. He saw every child who had ever been hurt by those who believed power meant freedom to be cool. Nicole approached him quietly. "She's going to survive," Nicole said. "The trauma is severe, but with proper treatment and support, she can recover." Chris nodded slowly. "Make sure she gets the best care available," he ordered. "Whatever she needs, whenever she needs it. Already arranged." "Sir," Nicole confirmed. Chris took one last look at Katie sleeping peacefully under sedation. Then he turned and walked back toward the command center. There was still work to do. The Valorian Empire needed to be dismantled. Observers needed to be positioned. And most importantly, the warning needed to be sent. Humanity had been underestimated because they were peaceful. Now the galaxy would learn that peaceful did not mean weak. That restraint was a choice, not a limitation. That humans would go to war for their children without hesitation. The Valorians would broadcast their warning as ordered. And every species that heard it would have to decide. Would they learn from the Valorian mistake? Or would they need their own lesson in what happened when you harmed something humanity held dear? Lisa Chun hoped they would choose wisdom, but she prepared for the alternative. 6 months after her rescue, Katie Morrison sat in a comfortable chair in Dr. Sophie Martinez's office on Earth and tried to explain the nightmares. "They're getting better," Katie said quietly, twisting her hands in her lap. "I can sleep through most nights now without waking up screaming." Sophie nodded encouragingly and made notes on her datapad. The therapy sessions happened 3 times a week and would continue for as long as Katie needed them. Eric Morrison waited in the outer office during every session, never far from his daughter. He had resigned from his research position and now spent all his time supporting Katie's recovery. The government had provided them with a comfortable home in a quiet neighborhood and enough financial support that Eric never had to work again if he chose not to. But more than that, they had given Katie something precious: safety. Captain Ryan Hughes visited regularly, having become a close friend to the Morrison family. He brought news from the fleet and stories about the stars that made Katie smile. Sometimes she would ask him about the rescue, and he would tell her carefully edited versions that emphasized the bravery of the crews without dwelling on the violence. Katie understood more than Ryan realized. She knew that people had died because of what happened to her. She knew that an entire empire had been dismantled. The weight of that knowledge sat heavy on her young shoulders. "It's not your fault," Sophie reminded her gently. As she did in every session, you were the victim, not the cause. Katie nodded, but the guilt remained. Meanwhile, across the galaxy, the Valorian warning broadcast had spread to every known civilization. The message was simple and direct. Humanity had destroyed the Valorian Empire in response to the torture of a single child. Other species reviewed their own policies regarding prisoners and interrogation. Several empires quietly released human captives they had been holding, suddenly worried about what might happen if those prisoners had been mistreated. The phrase "hide the children when humans arrive" became a common saying among spacefaring species. But it came with a corollary: the humans will come for their own. Humanity's reputation had shifted overnight from peaceful newcomers to something far more complex. They were feared now, but also respected. Species that had dismissed humans as weak began studying their technology and tactics. What they found surprised them. Humans had been developing advanced weapon systems for decades, while maintaining a facade of technological inferiority. The antimatter weapons, particle beams, and kinetic systems that destroyed the Valorian fleet represented only a fraction of humanity's actual capabilities. Admiral Lisa Chun briefed Earth's government on the strategic implications during a classified session. The overwhelming response to Katie Morrison's capture was not just about one child, Lisa explained to the assembled officials. It was about sending a message to the entire galaxy. She pulled up star charts showing the shifting political landscape. Every species now knows that harming humans, especially children, will result in total war, Lisa continued. But they also know we chose restraint when we could have chosen genocide. The government officials listened carefully. We demonstrated that we have the power to destroy civilizations, but the wisdom to use that power sparingly, Lisa concluded. That combination of strength and mercy is what will define humanity's place among the stars. General Chris Bennett attended the briefing and added his own observations. The Marines who participated in Katie's rescue all volunteered for extended service afterward, Chris reported. Morale across the entire military has never been higher. It made sense in a way. Soldiers wanted to believe they fought for something meaningful. Rescuing an innocent child and punishing her torturers gave them that meaning back on Earth. Katie Morrison celebrated her 14th birthday surrounded by family and friends. The celebration was small and quiet because large crowds still triggered her anxiety. But she smiled and laughed and for a few hours looked like any other teenage girl. Near the end of the party, a military courier arrived with a formal invitation. Katie was being awarded the Star of Courage, the highest civilian honor Earth could bestow. She would be the first child to ever receive it. Eric read the invitation and looked at his daughter with concern. "You don't have to accept if you're not ready," he said gently. Katie thought about it for a long moment. "I want to," she finally decided. "Those people saved me, and they deserve to see that I'm okay." 3 weeks later, Katie stood in the Great Hall at Earth Defense Command, wearing a simple blue dress. Hundreds of military personnel filled the room. All standing at attention, Admiral Lisa Chun approached with the medal, a crystalline star suspended from a blue ribbon. "Katie Morrison," Lisa said formally, "for extraordinary courage in the face of unimaginable suffering, for maintaining your humanity when subjected to inhuman cruelty, and for inspiring an entire civilization to stand in your defense. I present you with the Star of Courage." Lisa pinned the medal to Katie's dress and stepped back to salute. The entire room erupted in applause. Katie felt tears running down her cheeks, but they were different from the tears she had cried in the Valorian cell. These were tears of gratitude and relief. When the applause finally died down, Katie surprised everyone by asking to speak. A microphone was quickly brought forward, and the room fell silent. "Thank you," Katie began, her voice soft but steady. "Thank you to everyone who came for me and my father." She paused and took a deep breath. "I know that people died in the fighting," she continued. "I know that an entire empire was destroyed because of what happened to me." The room remained absolutely quiet. "I want to ask all of you to remember something," Katie said, looking around at the assembled military personnel. "Remember mercy. Even when you're angry." Her words hung in the air. "The people who hurt me were cruel because they believed strength meant being able to hurt others," Katie explained. "Please don't become like them." She looked directly at Admiral Lisa Chun. "You showed them that real strength is having the power to destroy but choosing not to," Katie said. "That's the humanity I want us to keep." The room full of hardened military veterans stood in silent ovation. Many had tears in their eyes. Katie had just articulated something they all felt but couldn't express. The ceremony ended shortly after, and Katie left with her father. But her words spread quickly through military channels and civilian networks. A child who had every reason to want revenge had asked for mercy instead. It became a defining moment in humanity's relationship with the galaxy. Years passed and Katie Morrison graduated from the Diplomatic Academy at the top of her class. She chose xenodiplomacy as her field, specializing in cross-species communication and conflict resolution. Her first assignment took her to the reformed, Valorian territories where human observers were helping rebuild their government. The Valorians had spent years dismantling their military apparatus and developing new cultural values around peaceful coexistence. Katie walked into the administrative center in the capital city and approached the main desk. The clerk processing requests looked up and froze. It was Commander Vex. The officer who had tortured her now worked as a low-level bureaucrat processing human aid requests. He recognized Katie immediately and went pale. His hands started shaking as he waited for her judgment. Katie set a datapad on his desk without saying anything. Vex looked down and saw it was an approval form for medical supplies destined for Valorian refugee camps. "I don't understand," he whispered. Katie finally spoke. "Humans remember everything," she said quietly. "We remember the pain you caused, and we remember the choice we made to show mercy." She turned to leave, but paused at the door. "You have a chance to be better than you were," Katie added. "Don't waste it." She walked out, leaving Vex staring after her. He looked down at the approval form and began to understand the true depth of humanity's nature. They could destroy civilizations when provoked, but they could also forgive when given reason. The warning broadcast across the galaxy had told species to hide their cruelty. But the lesson Katie Morrison taught was more profound. Humanity offered a choice. You could fear them and hide, or you could change and be welcomed. The galaxy was slowly learning which path led to a better future. And at the center of that lesson was a young woman who had suffered terribly, but refused to let that suffering turn her cruel. Katie Morrison became one of humanity's most successful diplomats. She helped negotiate treaties, resolve conflicts, and build bridges between species. Everywhere she went, people knew her story. They knew what she had endured, and they saw what she had become. She was living proof that humanity's greatest strength was not their weapons or their warriors. It was their capacity to choose compassion over vengeance, to choose growth over destruction, to choose hope over despair. The Valorian Empire's mistake had been underestimating humanity, but the galaxy's gift was learning from that mistake. And the teacher was a 14-year-old girl who asked them all to remember mercy.